Happy Thanksgiving from the Four Boxes Diner. So I thought we would celebrate talking about a topic that does indeed touch fingers with American liberty and indeed our right to keep and bear arms. And that is, how were the Indians, the Native Americans, viewed at the time of our founding? You know, the merciless Indian savages referred to in the Declaration of Independence. Let's break it down and let's talk about that history and how it touches fingers with the Second Amendment. Hey folks, I'm Mark Smith, host of the Four Boxes Diner, proud American, gun owner, constitutional attorney, member of the United States Supreme Court Bar, and I'm proud to say the top voice of the Second Amendment in America. Thank you, 2025 Gundies Awards. And on that same topic, I'm happy to report that I've been nominated again for the 2026 Gundies Award for Top Voice of the Second Amendment. You'll have an opportunity to vote in a week or so, starting December 1st. We'll break that down in a little more detail, but it is always an honor to receive such a nomination. I am incredibly honored to be associated with the Second Amendment community and gun tubers and the like. All right, with that said, folks, I want to wish you and your family a very happy Thanksgiving here in the United States. And it is a great time to be alive, and there's a lot of work for us to do in the freedom-loving community, including the community that loves the right to keep and bear arms, because if we don't have the right to keep and bear arms, if we do not have guns and the ability to defend ourselves against all forms of tyranny, then we are not citizens anymore. We are subjects or serfs, or perhaps even worse. So with that said, I just want to remind you all of a little bit of history here that may come up over the Thanksgiving table or in some of the propaganda pieces you may be seeing out there about the glorious Pocahontas animated feature film by Disney about the Indians. And how, we, the Europeans, we, the American settlers and the colonists, mistreated these Indians. And I just want to remind you all of a couple historical facts and tie it into the Second Amendment, because as you know, the Second Amendment and the Constitution derives in part from the notions of liberty, including natural rights theory, found in the Declaration of Independence that our founding fathers signed in 1776. In that Declaration of Independence, of course, here is the critical language written by the people that signed that critical document. King George III has excited domestic insurrections among us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. Now, that language apparently came mostly from Thomas Jefferson, who had previously written about the dangers of the Indians on the frontier. And I should note that there are many examples of Indians engaging in mass killings before the writing of the 1791 Second Amendment. And the reason why this can be irrelevant in modern-day Second Amendment litigation is because many left-wing progressive judges and the anti-gunners like to argue that when the founding fathers wrote the Second Amendment and the Bill of Rights, they were unfamiliar with the notion of mass killings, mass shootings, mass murder, the destruction of people in violent attacks, and somehow the human species has evolved since 1791 to be more dangerous and violent, and guns and all this other stuff can be used to misbehave and cause terrible harm to ordinary innocent people. But of course, historically, we know that's absurd for many, many reasons, not least of which is before even the Declaration of Independence in 1764, you had, as best I can tell, and I think as best as historians can tell, the first ever mass murder in North America of children in a school home. In other words, the school shooting concept, specifically mass killings of children, was not invented by Western Europeans in the 20th or 21st century, contrary to what maybe the anti-gunners want you to believe. No, it was invented essentially, or first occurred in this continent in 1764 when schoolmaster Enoch Brown was murdered, tomahawked to death by a group of Indians, as well as 19 children. That's right. In a schoolhouse in Pennsylvania, 19 children and their schoolmaster, Enoch Brown, was murdered by a group of marauding Indians. And keep in mind that anyone who's concerned about a 30-round magazine is obviously not acknowledging the fact that tomahawks have unlimited rounds. In fact, all knives, sharp instruments, and bayonets, by the way, have unlimited rounds. But nevertheless, that observation, that logic is lost on the anti-gunners, and no surprise, because they want to disarm us and turn us into serfs and possibly even slaves, but that's a whole separate topic. So anyway, that was in 1764. We had a mass killing by the Indians. And again, so when you're talking to your friends at family members at Thanksgiving about how the Americans, the colonists and the settlers of this great country were somehow evildoers and mistreated the Indians, you may want to remind them of the 1764 story of Enoch Brown. And of course, you have many other examples like the 1775 Penns Creek Massacre, where 26 settlers were attacked, 14 people killed, and 11 taken captive and made slaves, basically, by Indians. And of course, in 1778, you have the Cherry Valley Massacre, where 30 civilians were killed by a combination of British and Iroquois soldiers. So again, back at the time of the founding, when the right to keep and bear arms was memorialized, never forget the Second Amendment doesn't create the right to keep and bear arms. It memorializes this. Then if you have any debate about that or concerns about it, just look at how the language is written. It says, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That obviously, and the Supreme Court agrees with this, that confirms that the right to keep and bear arms is an pre-existing right that existed in 1791, and the Second Amendment simply affirmed or confirmed the existence of what was understood to be the natural right of self-defense using arms. And I should note that these issues involving the violence in the Indians came up in a Second Amendment case, specifically in the oral argument in the District of Columbia versus Heller. Justice Anthony Kennedy literally asked the government lawyer for D.C. about, hey, isn't the Second Amendment about protecting people from, among other things, Indians? Here's the direct quote from Justice Kennedy during the oral argument in Heller. That's right. During oral argument, Justice Kennedy basically asked, hey, wait, didn't the Second Amendment have something to do with defending yourself and your family against hostile Indian tribes, outlaws, wolves, grizzlies, and things like that? So literally during the oral argument in Heller, the discussion of hostile Indians attacking the settlers and our founding fathers literally came up during that oral argument in the famous DC versus Heller case back in 2008. So there you see a critical tie-in between the violence that existed and occurred with Indians, the Native Americans before the American Revolution, and how it played a role in our 1791 Second Amendment. I just want to also talk sort of a big picture culturally. It is clearly an ongoing effort by the public school systems, in my view, and many teachers, college professors, and people who simply hate America to do whatever they can to undercut the success of Western civilization and the fact that the United States is the greatest country in the world, which is why everyone tries to come to America and live here. No one is trying to break in and live into Somalia. Somalia does not have a problem, for example, of people trying to live in Somalia. Why is that? Is it just random? I don't know. You tell me. And that is because this so-called arrogant, racist, gun-crazed society of the United States remains the envy of the world. Contrary to what animated features that say the Indians and the merciless Indian savages were the good guys. That obviously wasn't true. That's not to say the colonists and the founding fathers did everything perfectly. They didn't. We don't do everything perfect today. It's not possible. We're humans, by definition. Nevertheless, it's also true, and you can talk about this during Thanksgiving, that Americans did, of course, take over this continent. But so what? I mean, virtually all land in the world was possessed by someone before the current occupants, right? And often land disputes and country disputes are settled by the force of arms. That's how things get settled, right? The Vikings attacked, they attacked essentially modern day the United Kingdom. The Norman conquest in 1066 took over England. That was the Normans, i.e. the French, and so on and so on. In fact, if you buy into the left-wing notion that you should give back the land, this sort of land declaration, whatever this ridiculous stuff is, then does that mean we in the United States have to apologize to the British Prime Minister and to Parliament and give back our land here to the British because we took it from them by force of arms during the American Revolution. I think we also took Texas in the western United States from Spain and Mexico. Do we have to give that back to them? I know they're trying to take it back through sort of a working invasion with many people in the progressive left that want to open up the borders and give back the Southeast to Mexico. I understand that as a goal, but that is certainly not a goal that I subscribe to or desire. And remember, the reality is that the human experience has been a very bloody place. The United States, all over the world, has been a bloody place for a very long time. We know that the Aztecs would cut out beating hearts from virgins and other local tribesmen to sacrifice those people and those beating hearts in the blood in honor of their god, Quetzalcoatl. So is it terrible that Columbus and the Western gang came on over and shut that down? I don't know. Seems like, getting your heart cut out while you're alive to honor Quetzalcoatl doesn't sound like a very great thing to do or society one wants to live in. Nevertheless, of course, we also know that the Native Americans and the Merciless Indian savages were behaving like this in 1492 when Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Just the way it is. And if you're worried about, the misbehavior and the violence that occurred in North America, how come they never talk about the Indian on Indian violence? How come they never talk about the Chippewas who are tortured by the Dakotas? Or, of course, the American Indians were oppressed, supposedly, but they inflicted tons of damage on the settlers, as we've already gone over here with the Enoch Brown disaster, the massacre, the Penns Creek massacre, the Cherry Valley massacre, not to mention the Deerfield, Massachusetts massacre and enslavement of the Protestants in Deerfield, Massachusetts, and delivering them up as slaves, essentially, for ransom to Canada, where that was a Catholic territory, and that was a big issue for the Protestants in Deerfield, Mass, to be dragged to the Catholic territory of Canada to essentially be enslaved up there by their Indian captors. So at the end of the day, folks, as you reflect upon this Thanksgiving, and I hope you and your family have a wonderful one as you count your blessings and our blessings here in the United States. In my view, at the end of the day, I am simply sorry that, in my view, a few Stone Age people simply are not going to be able to claim title to North America just by waving their hands and saying something like, "All you see is ours." That's just not how human society works, right? So at the end of the day, you have to protect what you have. You have to protect your country with force of arms. There is a connection between brain power, technological success, industrial might, and weapon system. They all go together, which is another reason, in my view, I don't love the idea of the Chinese and other foreign countries having access to things like rare earth minerals and weapon systems and technology. We should have that stuff here because you should never be dependent upon your enemies for anything that you really need, whether it be pharmaceuticals, medicine, weapon technology, intellectual property, whatever it might be. We should be doing that here in the United States. So anyway, folks, I did want to tie in this Thanksgiving gratitude I'm expressing to you all and these well wishes into something that touched fingers with the Second Amendment and modern cultural debate. So when someone is talking to you about how we took the land from the Indians, you need to say, thank God that happened. And here's a little bit of history. And by the way, moving forward, we should never be disarmed because the barbarians are always at the gate. Because in many respects, the Native Americans had an open border policy, one could argue, and it didn't work out that well for them. So as far as I'm concerned today in the 21st century, I don't think we want an open border policy here in the United States because, again, it usually doesn't work out that well for the people that have it. Okay, there you have it, folks. Hope you enjoyed today's episode on Thanksgiving. Make sure you follow me on X at 4boxofdiner, and don't forget to subscribe to the 4Box of Diner on YouTube and on Rumble. And we'll see you again soon here at the 4Box of Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.